Good morning, Rock Point. Happy Labor Day weekend to you. It feels like a holiday in here. It's like a pep rally, right? With the baptism and the music and the Lord's Supper. And it's my anniversary today. My 29th wedding anniversary is today. I hope that's the right number now that I said it out loud. I probably should have held that back just to play it safe. But anybody else here? I met someone in the earlier service that was married today. Anybody else here? Yeah, it's everybody. Good. All right. Well, your holiday prize today for showing up today for church is to grapple with me with what some people would say are the most difficult words that Jesus ever said. I know, that's big. Some would say that these words have been the hardest to understand, the trickiest to apply. So let me remind you of the words that, Jesus' words that upset so many people. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 here in the Sermon on the Mount. And you'll remember these. Jesus said, well, you've heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anybody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you, take your shirt, well, just go ahead and hand over your coat as well. If anybody forces you to go 1 mile, we'll go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, you've heard it said, love your neighbor. Some people think on the other end of that, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain eventually on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even pagans do that. So be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Well, there you go. Nice and easy. What is he saying? What are we supposed to do with this? For real. Earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, hey, listen, you've heard it said, don't kill people. I'm telling you, don't be angry with people. And we heard that and we said, well, that's a high bar, but I guess I can clean up my attitude and I'll work on it, Jesus. But you come to this. Don't resist the evil person. Love your enemies. Pray for the people that persecute you. People hear these words and they head for the door. How do I take that seriously? How can I accept that? It sounds so naive. Well, before you get up and make your way to the exits, at least hear this part. I have found that most people who reject this part of Jesus' teaching, they do so for reasons using cases that are not related to what Jesus is talking about whatsoever. They reject these words and they say, I tell you why this doesn't work. And the examples that they use, they're not the examples Jesus uses, and they're not the aim of his teaching. For example, people will say this. Now listen, if you get serious about this and live in this way, well, just think about what's going to happen in the world. The dictators, the despots, the bully nations, well, they'll just have control of everything. And I agree. Jesus isn't talking about foreign policy. This isn't Jesus's I have a dream speech. This is not his picture and plan for world peace. It's not that. Now, some of us here are old enough to remember this classic commercial opened with a hillside. It was actually in Italy, and it was a sunrise, and young people of all ethnicities were gathered, and they began singing a song. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And then the chorus goes, yeah, it's the real thing. This is the real thing. This is how we change the world. That's stupid. It was effective. I'd buy Coke. But that's a silly solution for world problems. This isn't Jesus's foreign policy suggestion. So people say, well, wait a minute. Forget the world. Let's just think about our community. If we start operating like this, crime is going to skyrocket. If we don't put checks and balances in place, evil people will just run us all over. And Jesus isn't talking about crime. The examples that he uses, not a one of them are illegal. Not a one. And God is clearly on the side of justice over and over again throughout scriptures. Even Jesus himself in Matthew 25, he said, listen, mark this down. When the world's about to wrap up, there are going to be two lines. There's going to be a line of sheep and a line of goats. And let me tell you which one you're going to wind up in. It depends on how you handle the least of these in this world. Jesus was serious about justice. He's not talking about that here. Well, some people bring it down even to a more granular level. And they say, listen, this turn the other cheek business, how long do you do that? How many cheeks do I have to turn? How many times do I have to do this? And this doesn't work out if you're in a situation where there is present violence, and I agree. Jesus isn't talking about the abused. He's not even talking about someone who is a victim of harsh violence over and over and over. Jesus isn't suggesting here, oh, you got hit? Well, just get back in there. They'll get tired. Just get back in there. They'll come to their senses. Just take it. Just take it. That's not what Jesus is saying at all. Can we just agree on this? That Jesus isn't clueless. Can we just agree that Jesus grew up in a world with his eyes wide open to all kinds of horror and evil and cruelty, and he's not trying to paper over that with some simple, just take it suggestion? He's not talking about that. Well, what's he talking about then? Well, luckily for us, he gives us very specific examples, and we can break it down. And you heard them. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, well, turn the other cheek also. Now, I don't want to get all CSI on this thing, but when the Bible talks about being struck, it assumes that you're always struck with a right hand. So let me ask you, if you're a right-handed person facing an opponent, how do you hit their right cheek? Could you turn a little bit? I'm trying to hit that spot right there. Could you kind of lean into me? No. How do you do it? You do it with that motion. It's a backhand slap. And I'm not trying to minimize the pain from a backhand slap, but I can say this with some confidence, that what's happening in a backhand slap is somebody's not trying to knock you out. I don't think they teach this move in MMA and martial arts. If you really want to get somebody, you just give them one of these moves right here, you take them right out, take them right off their feet. No, what is this move about? What is a backhand slap about? It's painful for sure, but it's demeaning. It's insulting. It's done by somebody in charge who acts out of anger. It's dismissive. A backhand slap. What's this other bit? Jesus says, now if somebody takes you to court and they're trying to work you over and take even the clothes on your back, well, give them everything you got. They ask for your shirt, give them your cloak. The understanding here is, if you ever were in a Bible play and you had to go home and your mom had to make you a historical garment or something, you know what it's like. The inside, the inner garment, was typically a sleeveless, long kind of tunic, and that's what Jesus is talking about losing in this litigation. But it was understood you never took a person's outer garment, their coat, because it was used as a pillow, it was used as warmth in the cold at night. If you were homeless, it was used to keep the weather off of you. But Jesus says, even though they don't ask for that, you give. And then this final illustration, the second mile business, was a real life experience for people in Jesus' day. The Roman Empire, while they ruled the world, they tried to be somewhat decent to the people that they had conquered, but Roman soldiers had the right, if they wanted to, they could dump their heavy backpack on a citizen and ask them to go with them for a mile. There were mile markers set out on the main roads in their day. It was understood you can't ask people to go 2 miles. But Jesus says, well, if they give you your pack, you're in control. Keep on going. Go the extra mile. It kind of reminds me of that old Steve Martin joke when he says that before you criticize a man, walk a mile in his shoes. That way when you criticize him, you're a mile away and you have his shoes. So what's Jesus getting at in this passage? I mean, what are these cases exactly? It's this. When we have been personally hurt, when we've been harshly treated, when we've experienced unkindness that wounds, this is a personal, present injury issue. And now that I've cleared that all up, don't you feel better? No, you don't feel better at all. Those are the worst kinds of pain. And at an early age, I knew how to address these kinds of people. I remember being 18 years old. It was my first ministerial job that I ever had. I had volunteered to go help churches in Kansas for a summer, and I was assigned to an older retired couple. The pastor, and the man's name was Methvin, delightful, very sweet, both he and his wife. They invited me to live with them and do some stuff to help them at their church. I lived in the basement. And when we first got there, he said, Greg, I need to tell you, we're having a family situation. And he said, I just want you to be aware. I said, what's going on, Mr. Methvin? And he said, well, my daughter's husband has told her that he no longer loves her and that he doesn't want to live with her. And I said, that's terrible. And he said, well, he's coming over this afternoon. And I said, you're going to give it to him, right? And he said, no, he's just coming over. What do you mean he's coming over? Well, he's going to come. We're going to spend time together, and my wife's going to make dinner. And, you know, I just didn't want you to be uncomfortable. And I'm thinking on the inside, well, now I'm uncomfortable because you need to hammer this guy. And I remember being in the basement, hearing them laugh upstairs, and I'm thinking, Methvin, I'm 18 years old. I can fix this. We need to put this guy in a boiling pot of regret and isolation, give him a dose of his own medicine, give him a couple of scoops of condemnation, and wake this guy up. And every Sunday afternoon, he would come over, eat dinner, play with his 1.5-year-old beautiful daughter, and get up and leave. And it infuriated me until it worked. Before I left, he reconciled with his wife, and I was baffled. Does that always work? No. But undeniably, Methvin's plan, or should I say, Jesus's counsel, had some muscle behind it and affected real change. So what we're reading today is not about how to be weak and spineless and nice in the face of people who use their power in destructive ways. That's not what Jesus is saying. In fact, if I could summarize this teaching, I would say it this way. Do not give up your power in Christ. Because what Jesus is coaching us to do in this passage, what he's trying to put on display and get into our hearts and into our minds, is what the real thing, real transformative power looks like. Now, when I say that, what am I talking about exactly? Well, let me give you these two examples. I think partly what Jesus is saying here is don't give up your power to bring about blessing from a curse. Don't give up that power, because that's exactly what Jesus is inviting us to do. He said this at the beginning of our reading. He said, you've heard eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? All that is a merry-go-round of scorekeeping and payback from hurt to hurt. And Jesus is saying, I'm telling you, get off the merry-go-round and live in a different way. You and I have more options at our disposal rather than mere retaliation and vengeance. I don't have to live attached to the painful memory or the painful incident. I can be detached from it. I don't have to live impulsively towards it. In Christ, I can weigh what's the best, loving, just thing to do, and do that. It's a way of saying to those who hurt us, you will not predetermine my response to you. I'm not going to live at the pace that you try to set. You and I are not going to be in sync in that way. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist, really agreed with Jesus' teaching. But he put it this way. He said, between the stimulus, the hurt, between the stimulus and the response, he said, there is a space. There's a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. And our response, if handled well, can be an opportunity for growth or for freedom, or it can be further injury and further enslavement to the hurt and the pain. He said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. And he said, the last human freedom you will ever have is to choose your attitude and to set your own course. And you may be thinking, did he write that on some patio in a villa in Italy overlooking some vineyard? It just sounds so lovely. No. He wrote that after 3 years of spending time in 4 concentration camps in the Holocaust. And in that crushing atmosphere, where every day was death dealing, he found space. Just a tiny space where he recognized he had a choice to either go down the slide of hate and bitterness and lose himself, or create another course. Don't give up the power. Don't give up the power to define that space in your own life and to protect that choice and that freedom so that something positive can come from the hardest of circumstances. Here's another thought. Don't give up the power to stop evil in its tracks. Because you see, as we were singing those Beatitudes earlier in the worship service, remember it was a few weeks ago that we went through the Beatitudes. It was a happy, lovely garden. We walked through there and we heard the blessings, the blessings, the blessings, the blessings, the blessings. And all of this is still attached to what we're talking about this morning, because you'll remember what we learned when Jesus said, blessed are the merciful. Well, you can only be merciful in the place of some pain. Blessed, Jesus said, are the peacemakers. And by that, he didn't mean, blessed are those who don't fuss and fight, make a bunch of noise and disrupt. He didn't mean it that way. Blessed are the peacemakers. He meant this shalom kind of peace, this idea that when I move into a hard space, my job is to invite God to use me to bring about the good that's needed in a hard situation. And here we are in our own personal hurt. Don't give up the power to stop the evil that you've experienced and encountered. Simone Weil said it this way, French philosopher. She said, evil is like a kind of currency. It's like money. It's like coins that are passed from hand to hand to hand to hand until somebody finally receives them and refuses to pass them on. It's the power to stop evil by not echoing everybody else's behavior and passing it on. That's what Jesus means in this passage. I was flipping through Twitter or X or whatever the thing's called now. I was just scrolling through and there was just some inane question that was probably clickbait, but it caught my attention and the question was simply this. It said, if you could stop one thing in the world today, what would it be? And I don't know, it was sticky and it got in my head and I thought about it all day long. And I don't know what you would have said, but here's my wish. If I could remove one thing from our world today, this would be my thing. I would remove contempt. Contempt. And the way I define that word is to hold someone in contempt, is to have absolute certitude and deep conviction that somebody else is worthless. There's no room to be able to respect or hear or learn from or value or care. When we criticize somebody, we're saying, hey, I don't like what you do. I don't agree with your stance. But when we hold someone in contempt, what we're saying is, you are the bad thing. And I'm against you. All of you. All of the time. And I just happen to believe that that's the air we breathe day in and day out. It's filled, it feels to me, it's filled with contempt. I know that's the case politically. I heard a political pundit use Jesus' teaching right here. He said, pray for our enemies because we're about to go medieval on them. Don't pray for me, don't pray for our side, pray for them because it's about to get hot. We're about to get them. And every day, it's that case religiously. Oh, you believe this and I don't believe that. You don't believe, well, I can't go to church for you. You're telling me everything I need to know about you and I don't even think you're a Christian because we can't. Contempt. I spend most of my time counseling now. And I see it in my office on the couch between married people. Contempt. There were some things that were problems early on, and there were some criticisms, and now they've grown into resentment. And the resentment was never treated, and now it is full-blown contempt. Closed. I can't see any future for us. I see your character. I know who you are, and I'm against you. We can't move from this spot. We're locked in. Contempt. It's a killer. It's a killer. Listen, do you want to make a stand for Jesus? You want to stand out for Jesus? Don't get louder. Don't get meaner. You start loving in the way that Jesus is describing here, and you will stand out like a lamp on full bright or a lighthouse in a storm because there's hardly anybody doing it. And that's exactly what Jesus intended, was for us to be able to shine in a dark world. That's what he called us to, right? Lamp on the stand, city on the hill, being salt, being light. Arthur Brooks is a professor and a writer, pretty well known now, but when he wrote his first book, Who Really Cares, which was kind of an economics book on charitable giving, it was an academic book. He didn't expect anybody to read it, but it caught on, and he got a lot of attention from it. And a guy from Texas, believe it or not, sent him an email. Here was the opening line: "Dr. Brooks, you are a fraud." And then he followed it up with 5,000 words in the email, and it took him 20 minutes to read it. And he just laid into every chapter how his research was bad, how he was an idiot, and he just tore it to shreds. Brooks says, I knew I only had a few options. I could either ignore him, or I could insult him, or I could destroy him, because I had really studied this stuff and I felt like the weight of research was on my side. And so he starts to destroy him, and it dawned on him as he wrote the email. He said, I didn't expect anybody to read this book, but this nut job, he really read this book. He really paid attention. He did more in-depth reflection than any of my reviewers, and it kind of bubbled in his head. And so this is what he wrote. He said, I want to thank you for reading my book. I know you hated it, but thanks for your time and attention. And 15 minutes later, he got this response: next time you're in Dallas, we should grab some dinner. "15 minutes from hate to friendship." Does it always happen that way? No. But it won't ever happen that way if we give up our power. Jesus knows this is hard. And so he concludes, and he said, here's my suggestions. Here's some targets for you. It's not easy, but I hope this helps. And so here's what Jesus says. He says, if you're going to use your power for good, this is what it means. It means don't feel good about the person that hurt you. This isn't a question of feeling. It's not a question of sentiment. Jesus says this. He says, love your enemy. He doesn't mean be civil, be polite, keep a respectable tone. That's not what he's saying. That's not what he means. He doesn't say, tolerate them, please. If you don't have anything good to say, keep your mouth shut, just move on, just tolerate. That's not what he says. He says, in your space, when you're figuring out what you're gonna do something that you may not feel, but that is loving. That is from a place that says, I'm trying to make this better. I'm trying to keep things open, not so that we can be pals, but that so I don't add curse and more injuries to this deal. Stronger medicine than just civility or tolerance. Loving action. And that takes a while to figure out. I get it. We're talking about being creative here. It requires some reflection. And Jesus says it will require this, and that's when he adds it. He says, I want you to do something loving for your enemies. And I want you to pray about it. And I would come home from school, Mom, this person is pushing me around, and well, will you pray for him? No, I'm not praying for him, Mom. That's a terrible idea. And I hate that suggestion. But I want to expand the idea here that Jesus isn't merely saying, what I want you to do is I want you to go somewhere, get on your knees, and I want you to pray all kinds of good wishes for this person that's injured you. There are some times I cannot do that. The thought of the person, the name on my lips is too painful for me to authentically and honestly wish the good. I can't always pray for the person that hurt me. But I can do this. I can always pray about. I can always pray about the situation. and being honest in God's presence to say, this is where I am. It's not where I want to be, but this is where I am, and I'm giving you room in my heart to help me work this out, work through the pain, and to heal so that I can speak blessing. Sometimes it's there for me. Eugene Peterson said, all the water in all the world can't sink one ship unless it gets inside. And one of the protective coverings we put in our soul and in our heart to make sure that the contempt doesn't pour in and poison us and poison those around us is we go to that space of prayer. And we empty out all of the collected hurt and injury, and we keep that space open for God to put other things in that space, which is why Jesus does something that's brilliant at the end of our passage. You may have noticed that at the end of the reading, Jesus didn't say, now I want you to love your enemies, and let me tell you why you need to love your enemies, because they're human too, and they've got a mother and a father, and they've got dreams, and they've got pets, and he doesn't focus on the enemy. He said, love your enemies, and pray for those who hurt you, and focus on your Father who loves you and loves them. Because I know in your mind's eye, you might not be able to love the other that's hurt you. But maybe it'll be easier if you just love their Father first. There's some people who think that the Lord's Prayer is actually a prayer for enemies because it follows this teaching. Do you hear it? Our Father. Whose Father? My Father? Your Father? His Father? Yeah, yes. Our Father who art in heaven. And there it goes. How interesting. There's some kids I just don't like, but I love them because I like their parents. I mean, it's just how it works sometimes. It's not always good, but it's a start. And I think that's what Jesus is suggesting. Is everybody expected to live this way? No. It's just people inside the kingdom who want to experience the blessing of knowing Jesus and being like him. And Jesus calls this surpassing righteousness. Martin Luther King Jr. said, Jesus ain't playing. He really means this. He really does. But it's surpassing greatness. This isn't rule keeping. This isn't being a nice guy. This isn't just getting along. This is walking with Jesus in the footsteps of Jesus and becoming like him. In one of the hardest places to live that out. I don't know how you got in the kingdom. For me, I was a 9-year-old boy. These baptisms, remind me of my own baptism. And I had done some stuff. I wasn't a drug dealer at 9 years old, but I had done some stuff. I'd lied, I'd done some mean things, but I didn't have a whole pile of things I didn't think. But somebody let me in the kingdom. I now know that the one who let me in the kingdom not only knew about my sins previous to being 9 years old, but he could see my whole life laid out. And he still let me in. And the one that let me in, I noticed on the way in, had a permanent nail print in his hand. And I knew it cost him something to let me in. And when I got a little older, he reminded me and asked me, will you help me work the door for others who need to get in too? Some days I tell him no, depending on who he's talking about. I just can't get that nail print out of my head. Will you give Jesus just a little wiggle room, a little space to begin to do something new, whether it's healing work in your heart or creative redemption work where you have to think about somebody? I find the people that hurt me the deepest are the people I know the best. And that makes this work hard. But I've also found If I give him just a little room, that's all he needs. And he'll take off and he'll do something beautiful. Let me pray for us. I pray for you not to just skip over today, but maybe this Labor Day, this is the labor that you need to begin. Lord, thank you that we're safe in your kingdom, that what people do to us, you get the final word of what happens about all that. We can rest in that. We're trying to give you a little space today, Jesus, to start something new in the way that we think, in the way that we feel, that you help us to grow in a new way. We're trying to remind ourselves that we are kingdom subjects. And now we need your help to live like it, to live out our God-created identity, to live generously and graciously toward other people, just the way that God lives towards us. Amen.